The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, we've been hearing from stakeholders that presenters on first contract arbitration who are scheduled to present tomorrow night have been told to move their presentations to the Law Amendments Committee to this evening, or they are out of luck. Mr. Speaker, the Law Amendments Committee is the opportunity that all Nova Scotians get to have their voice heard on the government's agenda, and this Premier is now putting a muzzle on debate over this contentious issue. We've been hearing from presenter after presenter, hour after hour, that the Premier is wrong to push this Labour agenda, and it seems that the Premier is tired of hearing from Nova Scotians about how we should focus on job growth and the economy rather than trying to fix a problem that simply doesn't exist. And my question to the Premier is, why is the Premier curtailing public debate on first contract arbitration?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, we're not, Mr. Speaker. There's time in the committee to hear presentations today. None of the current presenters have had their time frames changed at all. We're all here in the regular order, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, with the different time, we hope to be able to get through the presentations this evening and get on to amendments, and that, of course, is the work of the House.
Honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier has indicated that he will be introducing legislation which will make changes to lobbyist registration in our province. From all indications, these changes will leave a large loophole, specifically key party operatives such as staff in the Premier's office, ministerial aides and caucus staff. These individuals will not be covered by any restrictions on lobbying government. But my question is, why would the Premier not include senior political staff in his changes to restrictions on lobbying in our province?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the member is speculating about potential legislation. All I can say is we'll have to wait until the legislation actually comes forward.
The honourable member for Richmond on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this is an issue on the minds of Nova Scotians because we currently have the former provincial secretary of the NDP now lobbying the very government he used to work for, the NDP government for which he held the top post for 4 years. Clearly, as a person who has the ear of the Premier, the Cabinet and top staffers within the Premier's office. Mr. Speaker, the Premier has publicly stated that Ed Wark does not have insider information, yet is the same person that the Premier dismissed over the election financing cover-up from within the NDP. Speaker, is rich for the Premier to suggest that the person who failed to return $10,000 in illegal donations to the NDP is not in a position of conflict lobbying so soon after having been dismissed for violating the Elections Act. So, Speaker, how can the Premier state that the ultimate insider would have no inside knowledge of the NDP cabinet and its staffers?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the person he's referring to never ever worked for the NDP government.
The honourable member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Well, thank you. I want to thank the Premier for allowing me to correct that, because Ed Wark worked for the NDP party for 4 years as their secretary, and I want to thank my leader for correcting me. It was not $10,000 that the NDP accepted in legal donations. It was $50,000 that they accepted in legal donations. The $10,000 was the fine that they were given from the Chief Electoral Officer for violating the Elections Act. So thank you for the opportunity to be able to clear that up. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians expect transparency in those who are lobbying government to try to obtain contracts or funding from this government. Nova Scotia was one of the first provinces to bring in a Lobbyist Registration Act, and yet today the Premier feels that someone who held the top position in the NDP party somehow does not have inside knowledge of government or of the ministers involved that he was so closely aligned with before being fired by the Premier. So my question is, will the Premier commit today to including people such as Ed Wark in any new changes to the Lobbyist Registration Act in Nova Scotia?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, lobbyist registration usually refers to people who are actually employed by government, not employed by private organizations. I want to ensure, of course, that the record is correct, and of course, in fact, Mr. Wark, I believe, resigned and was not fired. And finally, of course, the findings of the Chief Electoral Officer was that the party knew, in fact, nothing about the background to the receipt of any money. Mr. Speaker, that is the facts.